Soft sticks.
Okay, perfect. Let's start talking about your childhood in Buffalo. What was it like living there?
I grew up in Buffalo, New York. It was actually, despite all the jokes that people make about that city, it was a great place to grow up. A lot of ethnic neighborhoods merged, and I think that was very constructive and very great for me as a writer, because you're exposed to a lot. I lived in the city, not in the suburbs, and went to school with all kinds of people. And you know, it was a great town culturally also. Buffalo has a rich history in art and music, and you know, I enjoyed my time there. But at a certain point, it was time to go.
So you mentioned that Buffalo, you lived in the city and that it was culturally rich. Did you go to plays and other cultural events as a kid?
When I was growing up in Buffalo, my family really didn't take me to many cultural events. I kind of found those things, you know, on my own. But there was a wonderful theater called the Studio Arena Theater, and a lot of plays were sort of born there before they went out to the rest of the country. And like I said, you know, there's a rich history there. Albright Knox Art Gallery is one of the finest small art galleries in the country. Buffalo was always a stop for anybody in the music business who was on tour. Very appreciative audiences, and you were just, you know, surrounded by it, and it was easy to get to, you know, it was just easy to go and take part in those things.
And what did your parents do? Tell me a little bit about your family.
My dad was an electrician at the Niagara Mohawk Power Plant, because Buffalo is very close to Niagara Falls, and my mom was a bookkeeper and had great dreams of being a professional singer. She was a singer at right out of high school. She was in a group, and they did some stuff with the USO. And then when she got married, my dad put a stop to that. So she was a very frustrated performer, and she made sure that her daughter had piano lessons, dance lessons, anything to prepare me, you know, to take over from where she left off.
And did you feel like you wanted to be a performer at that point?
No, I never wanted to be a performer. That was her thing, you know, and I remember that she entered me in a singing contest. There was a local kiddie show, and she taught me how to sing How Much Is That Doggy in the Window? And when I got there for the audition, I just burst into tears, and I just did not want to do it. And it was a very traumatic experience in my young life, but, you know, that taught me pretty early on that you know, if I was going to have a career in show business, it would be behind the camera and not in front of.
Did you have a sense that one of your parents had more power in the family than the other one?
Yeah, I mean, you know, my dad, and this is kind of common knowledge, was an alcoholic, and so it's really hard growing up in a house with that disease so prevalent. So, you know, we never knew which dad we were getting that day, you know, whether we were getting the good dad or the bad dad. And so it was a very difficult, I mean, they say one of the definitions of a comedy writer is somebody who had a painful childhood. So I would definitely put myself in that category. It was tough on my mom, it was tough on my brother, and I was the oldest of the two, so oftentimes you become the parent in that situation.
And how was your relationship with your brother? I mean, did you have a sense that they had different expectations for him than they had for you?
My brother was 6 years younger than me, and so, you know, we weren't close siblings because of the age difference. You know, I found him to be mostly an annoyance, you know, and now we're really tight, of course. But yeah, I mean, in that era, you know, my father had expectations of my brother, you know, that he would excel in sports, that, you know, he would make a lot of money, you know, and very different from me, you know, and I think it was really hard for my brother to live up to those expectations.
You say the expectations were different for you. What were the expectations for you then?
Well, you know, they want you to do well in school, and they want you to go on and be a nurse or a teacher, because those were good occupations for a woman. have a family, live happily ever after. You know, those were really the expectations for young girls at that time.
And what did you think about that? Is that what your plan was growing up?
I didn't really have a plan until I first went to New York City at the age of 12. My mom and her girlfriend, who had a daughter my age, decided to take a little road trip. And we went to New York, and the minute I hit New York, at the age of 12, I knew this was where I was going to live. This was where I was going to go. And everything that I did from that point on was designed to get me there. I just fell in love with the city. I mean, my mother and her girlfriend couldn't wait to leave. It was so overwhelming, you know. We were staying in some horrible hotel in Times Square filled with hookers, you know. But for me, it was just absolutely fascinating. It was a big life. I could see having a big life in New York.
So talk to me about that, how you made that transition from being in Buffalo to getting yourself to this new life, basically, in Manhattan.
Well, I went to Buffalo State College because I couldn't afford to go to any of the other colleges that I was accepted at. It was just going to be too much of my life paying back loans. So I, you know, thought I wanted to be a journalist, and so I was disappointed in that, you know, Buffalo State didn't have a journalism course, but I thought, all right, I'll just go and I'll get a teaching degree, and then somehow I'll get myself to New York and I'll get a job on the New York Times. That was my idea. And along the way, I met my mentor, Warren Enters, who was a very well-known theater director in New York and had decided to take a sabbatical and teach. And he wound up at my college, and I wound up taking a playwriting course from him and got the bug that's really what I wanted to do. So I got my teaching degree, but the minute I graduated, I spent 6 months teaching and then saved enough money to move to New York. And then I was there for 12 years.
So what was your first job in New York?
My first job was actually in public television. And I got a job working as a secretary for a part of PBS that sold programs to schools and other institutions. There weren't any DVDs at that time, so you know it was all that technology was first starting. And then I worked my way into a situation with Jack Venza, the legendary Jack Venza, who headed up the Theater in America, a division of PBS, and I learned so much there because there were so many playwrights and wonderful film writers working there at the time. So it was just one little step at a time with no money, and you know, I didn't even have a phone for the first 9 months that I lived in New York because I couldn't afford one. It was either food or phone. So if you wanted to reach me, you had to leave a note taped to my mailbox in the lobby of my building, and an apartment that I couldn't afford, but it was an exciting time. And of all the things that have happened to me in my life, I still look back on that first year in New York as the most exciting year I've ever spent.
Why is that?
Well, you know, New York just sort of saved me. The direction that my life was going to go in was that I would teach and get married and have kids, and you know, that would be my life. Fine, you know, but I just had a bigger plan for myself, and New York, I feel like, really invented me in a way, you know. It's just the greatest place in the world, and when I moved away, it was, you know, not something I really particularly wanted to do, but I did because it was the right thing to do at the time. And I've just recently come back.
So talk to me about the class that you took in discovering playwriting.
I like to write from a very early age. I remember writing a little essay in second grade for dental week, you know, and it was something about a tooth, I don't know, but my teacher raved over it. And you know, when you get that kind of feedback as a kid, you know, it just kind of sticks with you. And then later on in high school, I would write parodies of the novels that we had to read, you know, House of the Seven Gables, and you know, You know, it was my way of going in my room, shutting the door, taking out my little Smith Corona typewriter, and shutting out the rest of life, which was sometimes not that pleasant. You know, I think when I got to college and I started to take this class in playwriting, I learned that I had an ear for dialogue. And it was so exciting to write something and then see your fellow classmates perform it, and that I could make an audience laugh. You know, I could have an impact that way. And I was pretty far gone at that point. That was what I was going to do. I was going to find a way, you know, to be a professional playwright. I was going to be the female Neil Simon. You know, that was my goal. I didn't realize that, you know, you had to actually pay your rent and feed yourself. And young playwrights aren't really able to do that very easily. So I segued into public television as my first job and wound up working with playwrights. So it was just a great situation.
So you went from being a secretary to writing at some point. I'm wondering if you can talk to me about that transition.
I was always writing while I was working as a secretary. You know, I would go home at night and I would work on things. And because I was working in the Theater in America division, I was able to show my work to people like Lindsay Law and Bo Goldman, and get some feedback. And so eventually I wound up in a very experimental television division called the Television Laboratory. And we were doing very, very interesting work there. And again, I was there in an administrative position. I was writing grant proposals. And they had raised money to do the first television movie, full-length television movie for public television called The Lathe of Heaven. And they hired a very fancy Hollywood writer, and he did a couple of drafts. And the director and the producers were very close to having to go shoot and were not happy with the script. So they knew I was a writer, and they said, just read this and give us some thoughts on it, what you think, you know, someone could do to improve this. And I took it home and I rewrote it. And that's the script they shot. And so that was my big break. I got a Writers Guild Award nomination for that, and then I was told it's time to go out to Hollywood and get an agent, and that's what I did.
You make it sound really easy. And I'm wondering, was it really that easy for you when you went to Hollywood?
No, it wasn't that easy. I mean, getting to that point was not easy, you know, but you know, I'm always a person with a plan. And I kind of had a plan, you know, and so I took advantage of the opportunities that I had in public television to work with certain people who helped me. And if there was an opportunity, I took it. You know, I wasn't shy about it. And so I think taking that script home and rewriting it was a bit of a bold move. And I wasn't sure how it would be received, but I thought, what the heck, you know, well, I might as well. It was easier to just do it than give notes on it. So yeah, but I had struggled. I had tried to get an agent before that, and nobody wanted to know from me. But the minute that thing hit the air, that was then I was able to get an agent and move ahead. So
talk to me about your early career in LA.
In the category of lucky breaks, again, I was writing television movies for various networks, and a few of them got made. And CBS was looking to do its first half-hour comedy series that it could own, because the financial and syndication rules were changing, and so they were allowed to own a half-hour. And they wanted to develop something based on an idea that they had about a female district attorney in New York who was someone who tried very grisly murder cases, and you know, based on somebody that they had actually knew existed, and so they asked me if I was interested in doing this, and I wasn't. At that time, I wasn't interested in doing half-hour comedy because it really didn't have a good reputation at the time. You know, this predated Cosby, and you know, it was a lot of jiggle, what we call jiggle comedy, you know, and it just seemed kind of dumb, and I didn't want to do it. And my then husband said to me, no, you really should go and at least explore this. So I went to New York for 3 weeks, and I sat in the DA's office, and my tour guide was Rudy Giuliani, because he was second in command to Robert Morgenthau at that time. And you can't make these stories up, the things that go in and out of that building. And I got very inspired, and then I wrote this show, a pilot for the show, but I had no idea what format, you know. So I was writing scenes to be shot outside, and you know, it was kind of a hybrid of what it should have been, and they seemed to like it, and instead of going through the pilot process, they just ordered 6 episodes right away. So suddenly I was just thrown into this world, and didn't know anything about it, didn't know what I was doing. So they wanted to preserve my voice as a writer, but knew I didn't know how to make a show. So they assigned 2 seasoned producers to me, Saul Turteltaub and Bernie Ornstein, who had done That Girl and many other wonderful shows. And they totally showed me the ropes. I mean, these guys were my godfathers. They made me do everything, learn everything, sit in the editing room with them. They even made me do audience warm-up once, because they said, you know, one of these days the warm-up guy isn't going to show up, and you're going to have to do it. Oh, I was awful at it. But I approached it as a teacher. So I give them so much credit. You know, they really showed me how to run a show, and I took all of that with me onto the next one.
At this time, were there a lot of other women in these meetings that you were having when you're talking about pitching shows?
When I was starting out in series, there were very few women running shows. There were very few women in the writer's room. There were very few women anywhere other than, you know, in front of the camera. So there weren't a lot of role models, you know, to look to. And in a way, I was kind of, you know, forging my own way. But I have to say, I'm often asked this question, are you the only woman, and did you find a lot of resistance? I was embraced by some wonderful men who really, like Saul and Bernie Ornstein and Turteltaub, and people who ran Warner Brothers Television, people at CBS. They just helped me, you know, and I know it's unusual, you know, it's not the norm, but I got a good helping hand from a lot of great guys.
After that, you were able to go on and then work on My Sister Sam. You were executive producing. Can you just talk about that and what that felt like?
My show, Foley Square, had been canceled after 14 episodes. It was critically well received, but didn't quite catch on. And then CBS liked what I did, so they had a new show called My Sister Sam with Pam Dauber, and they had done a pilot, and they felt it needed improvement, and they wanted to bring a new team on to do the series, and they asked me if I would come in and run that show. Now, this would be the first time I'd be running a show on my own, so it was a scary proposition. And that first season was a lot of learning curve. I didn't have Saul and Bernie with me anymore, my great godfathers, and I was really going to have to do this by myself. And it was the first time I was hiring a team of writers, and the first time I was running the writer's room. And I made a lot of mistakes, you know, and I learned a lot, but it was a tough first year, very, very tough. It's a hard job. It's the hardest job in show business. I don't care what anybody says. Running a half-hour comedy is the hardest job in show business, and I never was home. I would sometimes sleep in the office. The hours were so long, and because I was figuring it out, I didn't have, a routine yet that worked for me. We'd be there at 9 a.m. For a read-through, and then did a lot of rewriting, sometimes driving home at 3, 4 a.m., and then 2 or 3 hours of sleep in a shower and turn around and come right back. And I did that for a year, and it was tough going, very, very tough.
What makes it so hard?
You're dealing with a lot of personalities. You're putting on a play and filming it in front of a live audience every week. You have to have a lot of advanced planning. You have to know how to cut a show. You're breaking stories for upcoming episodes while you are rehearsing and producing and rewriting the current episode, and you are also cutting and mixing the previous episode. So it's a lot of work, and because the hours are so late and you have to go in the writer's room and be funny and write jokes, it's pretty challenging.
You said that it was a difficult year. Is there some particular memory that comes to mind of that represents how hard it was?
I think that there was some politics going on, as can happen sometimes. There was really somebody else who would have wanted to be running the show, and so there was a certain division among the troops, and that was a real eye-opening experience also. And the other person who wanted to be running a show was a woman. So, it's like that old thing, this town isn't big enough for both of us, it's ridiculous. And then we did make peace with it, and then the second season was much, much easier.
Was there a point where you felt like you turned a corner?
Yes, I think at the beginning of the second season, I had enough confidence that I knew what I knew what I was doing at this point, and that we could make a good show if we all worked together and we're all on the same page. And I had a lot of difficult conversations with people, straightening them out, and just decided to really take charge of the situation and get it done. So that was the turning point.
And how did the show do?
It did great in its first season. In the second season, it began to falter because there was some pretty stiff competition that the show had not had on another network before. And by the end of the second season, I think the decision was made not to go forward with a third season, which I was okay with because I had another show that I wanted to do very badly called Murphy Brown.
The perfect segue. So tell me about Murphy Brown.
Murphy Brown took place it was a workplace comedy. And they were kind of out of favor at the time. Nobody was really doing them, and I was always very fond of workplace comedies. Murphy worked in a newsroom for a big network like CBS, and she was a co-anchor of a magazine show called FYI. And we put this show together at a time when women like Diane Sawyer and Barbara Walters and Connie Chung were becoming almost bigger stars than the people they were interviewing. And that was really a big breakthrough because at that time there were no female anchors of the news, and it was a struggle for women to maintain their position, in that arena. And so I thought, well, this would be a really fun thing to do. Let's put her in there. We can make the show very topical, and we can let this character carry the comedy rather than be the person who reacts to the funny things that the men are doing. So that was my idea. Nobody had done political satire in a long time. So we had a workplace comedy, political satire, a rather rude woman at the center of the show who was going to carry the comedy, and she was just coming back from the Betty Ford Center when we meet her, where she had gone for treatment because she had a big drinking problem. You didn't see much of that in the 80s or before.
So how easy of a show was it for you to sell?
CBS bought the show right away, off the pitch, but they asked if I could change her from a recovering alcoholic to somebody who was just coming back to work after being at a spa because she was very stressed out. And then they asked if instead of turning 40, which Murphy was doing in the pilot, that she could be 30. So I said, no, I think that would really change the whole idea of what I'm trying to accomplish here. I don't think so, but I'll make a deal with you. Let me write it my way. And then if you don't think that I've accomplished what I'm telling you I think I can, making the character likable and relatable and all those things that they were afraid would not happen, then I'll take another pass at it and do it your way. So I said, okay. In those days, they would give you your head. If you earned it, creatively, they would let you take that risk. They don't do that anymore. But I wrote my version, and then the writer's strike, the big 1988 writer's strike hit, which meant that I couldn't touch the script. So if they wanted to shoot that pilot, they had to shoot my first draft that came right out of the typewriter. And that's what they did. Another lucky break.
Now, how did you feel the night before it aired? Were you nervous? Were you excited? And what was going through your head?
Very nervous. It's an opening night, really. I mean, you put so much time and effort into things. And by the time it aired, we'd already shot 6 episodes, and we felt pretty good about them. But you never know how the audience is going to react. And we came on the air in November. It was football season. We were Monday night at 9 o'clock going up against football. And it took us a year. I think we were number 30 or 33 in the ratings for the first year. We didn't really crack the top 10 until the summer of our second season. So people think that that show was an immediate audience favorite, but it wasn't. It took a while for it to catch on because it was a smart show. We weren't writing down to people, and it became a word of mouth type of show. But the critics loved it. That really helped us. That kept us on the air. And then we had gotten a lot of Emmy nominations our first season, so then that made people want to tune in and see what other people were talking about. And eventually, instead of it just being mainly a female audience, we got all the guys too. As soon as football went off in December, they all came to see what their wives were watching. And then we were consistently in the number 1, 2, or 3 spot.
And what do you think attracted people to it? Why did she catch on?
Women didn't see themselves on television in a very accurate way. I think women were looking for someone to relate to, and they loved her. They embraced her. She was very accomplished. She was funny. You have to give a lot of credit to Candice Bergen because she, would do anything for a laugh. And I think when you look like that and you are willing to take a pratfall, people love you for it. There were many reasons I think that people tuned in, and I think sometimes just to see what she was wearing too. She looked great in clothes, and we had every fashion designer throwing clothes at us, which was really fun.
Now talk to me about the Emmy. It was a difficult first year, but then there are several nominations. Can you just talk to me about what that was like to find out that it was nominated in so many different categories and you yourself were nominated?
The day that those Emmy nominations came out, and we found that we were nominated for 11 Emmys in the first season, but we were only number 33 in the ratings. We were shocked, thrilled. I mean, the flowers, the champagne, the whole show shut down for half a day. We were so excited because we had worked so hard, and it was so nice to be recognized like that. And I personally was recognized for writing the pilot also, that script that came right out of my typewriter untouched that we shot without changing a word was pretty great. And I wound up winning that Emmy also. So that was a highlight, a life highlight, I think.
Dan Quayle was a person who came up for Murphy, and I'm wondering where that came from. Was that from you or from the other writers? How did he become a target, and why?
Well, I'm a bit of a political animal, and so I had this platform every week. I tried not to abuse it, but I was horrified at the level of intelligence of our vice president, and it was scary, you know, that he was a heartbeat away from the presidency. I don't think we could ever get away now with what we did then, but we handled some pretty serious topics, and obviously, you know, I'm a well-known liberal Democrat, and that's what my character was, and we had very smart writers, and we would have to almost predict what the headlines would be in advance because our shows were filmed 3 weeks in advance of when they would air, and we got pretty good at it, I have to say. You know, we sometimes really hit it on the nose, but it was amazing to me looking back that we were able to take a stand on so many issues and not be called on the carpet for it. And I think that's what happens when you're the #1 show or the #2 or #3 show. They kind of look the other way because obviously the audience was embracing this.
When you say you were nervous that he's a heartbeat away from the presidency, it's just why? What was it about him that made you concerned about him as a figure?
Dan Quayle was the male version of Sarah Palin. We all know who Sarah Palin is now, and Dan Quayle and Sarah Palin, in my opinion, have a lot in common. Their grasp of history is unusual. They mispronounce things, they misspeak. The famous Dan Quayle incident of being at a spelling bee and correcting a child for spelling potato inaccurately when in fact it had been accurate and his spelling was inaccurate. So, you know, that's who was in the West Wing. That's who was in and out of the Oval Office. And you know, we just had had enough of that.
So leading into when you decide, I guess, that Murphy is going to have a child, can you just talk to me about how that decision came about?
I was searching around in the 3rd season for a way of freshening up the show, giving her a challenge that she hadn't faced before. And what would be the biggest challenge in this character's life? Taking care of another person and being a mom. And Candice and I had talked about this and tossed it around from day one because Candice is such a good mom. She had a hard time, you know, imagining that this character would go through life without having a child. On the other hand, I'm not a mom, and I did not have a hard time imagining that, but it seemed like a good idea at the time, and so we got her pregnant. And it was a storyline that carried us through that whole season. Was extremely popular, went into the 4th season. At the end of the 4th season, she had the baby. On episode 101, she had the baby, which was a very famous episode. And I remember somebody asking me if I was concerned about conservative watchdog groups, you know, taking me to task on this, you know, because she was a single woman electing to have a child on her own. That was an interesting dilemma for Dan Quayle because he came out very strongly against this choice, but yet what was the alternative? Because his administration, the Republicans, were very anti-choice. So it kind of backed him into a corner.
How did you find out what he said, and do you remember if you could approximate what he said?
He was making a speech in San Francisco, and he had not seen the episode. And in his speech, he was trying to find a way to bring attention to this new term that they were using, because it was an election year coming up, called family values. And so he decided that he would go after the most popular television character, and he, even though he had never seen the show, he essentially criticized her for making a lifestyle choice and making the decision to have a child just another lifestyle choice. And so I was off the show. I was in my car, I was driving around, and you know, my phone was ringing, and my assistant said, "You better come back to the office. Every news organization is on the phone. They want a statement from you." And I said, "About what?" And so she read me, you know, what he had said. I went, "Oh God, all right." This was his revenge for all those Dan Quayle jokes. One of my goals with the show was to blur the line between fiction and nonfiction. So we would often bring the real newsmakers onto the show, and they would react with our characters as if they were real people. There was a poll, I think once Diane Sawyer left 60 Minutes, who should replace her, and there was a New York Times poll, and Murphy Brown came in first. So, you know, it was all working. So then when Dan Quayle decided that he was going to blame her for the fall of Western civilization, was sitting there going, "What, am I in a film? Am I in a movie? This is just surreal." So, and it went on like that. It became a huge issue about choice, about women in general, classes, what family values really means, which to me was very exclusionary. You know, if you're this kind of family, it's okay. If you're that kind of family, it's not. And it did have an impact on the election.
In what way?
Bill Clinton won. You know, there were many years of Republican rule, and then I think that for lots of reasons, it started to feel to the country that there was something unkind going on, and this was a fresh face. This was somebody new, the man from Hope, you know, and it's all sounding a little familiar, right? But and then I got a telegram from President-elect Clinton saying thank you for helping, and it wasn't our intention to do that, but you know, it kind of did.
If you could just explain how you actually responded that day that you heard about it and the press was waiting for you. They were waiting for you to say something.
So I go back to my office and I've got all kinds of requests for a statement. Dan Rather asked me to actually sit next to him at the anchor desk and open the show with him. And I called Howard Stringer, who is now Sir Howard Stringer, who had run the news division at CBS for a very long time. And I said, "What should I do?" And he said, "Don't be baited into anything. Just make one thoughtful statement and then back off and let everybody else do the talking." I said, "Okay." So the essence of my statement was, if the vice president believes that a woman is not capable of raising a child on her own, then he'd better make sure that abortion remains safe and legal. So then they did not know how to respond to that. The next day, Candice Bergen called me. She was in New York, I was in Los Angeles, and she said, and it was really early, she said, "Have you seen the New York Times?" I said, "No." She said, "Go down the end of your driveway and get the paper." And above the fold was a picture of Candice holding the baby as Murphy Brown, and that statement, and then all hell broke loose after that. So, you know, we really thought we were in a Preston Sturges film. You know, we really did not know what had hit us, and we tried to lay really low, but the debate raged on. It was a good one too. It was good that people were talking about this. You can sneak up on people when you're doing a comedy. You know, it's not like you're being forced to eat your broccoli or, you know, here, take this cough medicine. We're not lecturing you. We're just taking a subject, and we tried to show both sides of it and bring out the humor. But you know, our character always had a particular point of view. I make no apologies for that. You know, I'm glad I did it. Sometimes people will say, "Well, you know, you would be abusing your privilege having this half hour." And I went, "Oh, it's my turn, sorry." You know, I feel if the other guys have the stage and the microphone, you know, for 12 years, then it's okay for us to have a half hour every Monday to say, you know, the other side of things. I think it's just, you know, easier to get a point across sometimes with comedy than with drama.
You left the show for a while. Can you talk to me about that briefly and then sort of how it came to be that you came back for that final season?
I left the show after the 101 episode. It was always planned that I would leave at the end of the 4th season to start another show. And I started with my then husband a company, and we had other shows that we wanted to do, and left my wonderful writing team in place to carry on. But I left them with a huge job also. I left them with a character who now had a baby. And it was up to them to figure out how to integrate this child into a show that was so embraced by single, independent women. And now suddenly she was a mom. So there was a bit of a struggle with that. I came back in the 6th season to consult for a short time. And then essentially it had to go on its own, and had many different executive producers and different characters coming and going. It went for 10 years. We decided to do a 10th season if I came back to the show and we could do something really kind of edgy. So we made a decision to give this character, who always felt that she was immortal, breast cancer. And the Television Critics Association was just like, this is not a funny topic. You will never pull this off. And we knew that we could, because having done so much research with breast cancer patients, the humor is the savior, and finding the humor in a very dark situation is what people always told us kept them going. So we knew we had a lot of stories, and that was the way we ended it.
Do you remember any of the ways in which you use humor to make breast cancer funny?
Well, I mean, breast cancer isn't funny, but when she had to face the possibility that she might have to have a mastectomy, she brought Frank Fontana, her best friend, with her to the doctor's office to look at samples of breast for reconstructive surgery, because she wanted the male opinion, and we got some really good, we got a wonderful scene out of that, because all the different sizes are in a box, and just went on like that, and we got a lot of important information across too. There was a big uptick in the number of women getting mammograms for the first time, and so we think we actually were able to perform a bit of a public service at the same time too, because if it could happen to her, it can happen to anybody.
Do you remember that number, the percentage of women?
We were told that there was a very large uptick in the number of women who got mammograms for the first time. In the 30% area, that's the power of television. It really sets you back on your heels. You think, wow, use it for good and not for evil. You can really make a change. You can make an impact with a half-hour comedy show.
Your whole career, pretty much, you were focused on, it seems to me, advancing the image of women on television. And so I'm wondering if you can just talk about what you feel like you were trying to do and to what extent you feel like you succeeded in that.
I never set out to advance the image of women on television. I just wrote what came out of me and what appealed to me. And the result of that was that I wrote television shows that had women at the center, that were independent and strong and vulnerable at the same time, and without going so far as to be preachy about it. It was really the way these characters lived their lives that was the statement. But it wasn't something that I sat down and said, okay, now I'm gonna write a character who is going to smash through the glass ceiling, and first and foremost, entertaining, comedy, funny, but with somebody in the center who I feel I did not see very often.
Do you think the image of women on television is a little bit behind where we actually are in society?
I think television reflects what's going on in society for the most part. It doesn't really dictate to society what to be. I think it's reflective, but I'm disturbed by a lot of what I see on television, the reality shows, you know, the Real Housewives shows, and you know, I feel like that's the dark ages, you know, that we're going back. You know, I don't see too many Murphy Browns. I mean, the interesting thing is that 10 years after Murphy had her baby, Jennifer Aniston's character on Friends had a baby under almost the exact same circumstances. Single woman having a baby. Nobody said boo. You know, nobody said boo. So it's a matter of timing too, you know, but I do think we reflect.
I'm switching gears a little bit into the women's movement, because you were coming of age as the movement was growing, and I'm wondering, were you paying attention to it at all? What did you think of the women's movement?
I didn't read The Feminine Mystique when it came out. I was too young, you know, and uninterested, but there were rumblings. I mean, look at my mom, you know, she had an ambition, she had a dream, she had a goal, and yet she was a homemaker who was playing the role of the good wife, and it wasn't what she was going to be allowed to do. And I looked at that and I went, ooh, that's not right. That doesn't feel right, you know. You should be able to go off and do that, you know. And why are my choices of career these sort of careers that are supposed to be good careers for women? You know, why can't I be an astronaut? Not that I wanted to be an astronaut, but you know, why didn't you see this? Why didn't you see that? It was just percolating, starting to percolate to the surface when I was in my early years.
In 1968, there was a protest at Miss America. Do you remember it?
Well, not only do I remember it, but I wrote a 13-part series for HBO that never made it to the air called The F Word, and it was about this movement, the feminist movement, and it was all stories that you did not know, not the classic ones, but or a story you did know from the point of view of a different kind of character than you would expect to find in that situation. HBO didn't put it on the air because they didn't think any men would watch it. So I did quite a bit of research into that. You know, I always loved the Miss America pageant. I grew up watching it. It was always a big event in our house. My grandfather could always pick out the winner from the first 50, or maybe it was 48 states at that time. You know, he always managed to pick. And so it wasn't until later that I realized, well, wait a minute, you know, why are they parading around in bathing suits? You know, what is this? You know, it was an interesting time to be a girl, you know, because there were so many images that we grew up with and incorporated into our culture as women that we were seriously questioning.
What about Roe v. Wade when that passed? Do you remember that?
Yes, I do remember when Roe v. Wade passed, and I remember very vividly friends of mine who had gotten pregnant in college and what you had to go through in order to have an abortion, how dangerous it was, how frightening. I remember there was the go-to guy who really was the coat hanger guy, you know, and you know, you think about that time and when it passed, it was like, well, what took so long? You know, and it's under fire. It's been under fire ever since. Equal rights for women. Why would you not campaign for that? You know, it didn't seem like having the argument against it was that it's already constitutional. we don't need a constitutional amendment, and yet the women were still struggling for equal pay, for equal treatment in sports, equal treatment everywhere. So yes, we campaigned for it.
Looking back now, do you think it matters that it didn't pass?
Oh, that's whether it mattered that the ERA passed or not. I think we've done a pretty good job of advancing ourselves as women without that protection, but I think symbolically it was a blow, you know. It felt like a failure when there had been so much momentum. And I worry about the up and coming generations of women. You know, they don't really get what we went through, take a lot for granted, I think. I'm glad they have a lot more opportunity than I had, but I think it's important for them to know how they got it. And that's a big part of the story, you know, that we weren't entirely successful. And feminism remains a dirty word today. It's if you're a feminist, you aren't allowed to shave your legs, you can't wear makeup, you have to hate men. I mean, this is what I'm talking about when I say we didn't quite get the message across. And yet we managed to break through so much of that glass ceiling. It's exciting now to be on a TV set and watch how many women are, you know, in the writer's room and how many women are directing and producing. You know, come a long way, baby.
I'm interested in that idea of young women not understanding, because if you can just push that one step further, if they don't understand, then what? I mean, why does it concern you if they don't understand? What's the danger in that?
Well, if our daughters never had a friend who had to have a back alley abortion, then they're not going to particularly get on the we must save Roe v. Wade bandwagon. It's going to seem like a marginal issue to them, or a, you know, irrelevant. But nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, that was a terrible, dark time, and you know, I think that it's something that comes up in every election. It becomes, you know, a big political football, and I think there's a certain amount of ambivalence about it, because the right to choose and not have the government tell you whether you're going to have a child or not it's just something that we really have to preserve, and it takes a lot of persistence. You can't be ambivalent about it.
Do you consider yourself a feminist?
Oh, I totally consider myself a feminist, yeah. I mean, I don't go around wearing a t-shirt that says I'm a feminist, you know. But I think you're a feminist by your actions. You know, I think a lot of men are feminists. You know, I think people don't realize that they are. Again, you know, it doesn't go to that old stereotype of, no, you can't shave your legs and you can't wear makeup and all of that. You know, we're all of us who try to take down the barriers to human achievement are feminists. You know, and it benefits men too, you know, because everybody got stuck in a role that wasn't necessarily, you know, productive, and now men can stay home and be with the kids if they want to, and the women can go out to work, and you know, this is all, we're the guinea pig generation for this. This is all, you know, experimental stuff, but the fact that it's happening is great.
What's the most meaningful piece of advice you've ever received?
I think the most meaningful piece of advice I've ever received is, don't worry if not everyone likes you. You know, you can't please everybody, and if you try to please everybody, you're going to wind up making yourself miserable.
What advice would you give to a young woman on the work-life balance?
Well, there's a lot of talk about how you live a balanced life if you're a woman with a big career. And I think sometimes living a balanced life is overrated. There are times in your life where you cannot live a balanced life, and you shouldn't. You know, if you've got a dream and a goal, sometimes you've got to just go for it, because you make compromises, you're not necessarily going to get there. And then there are other times in your life when you can step back from that and say, okay, now I'm going to relax a little bit. I'm going to live a little bit of a different kind of life. I don't think you can have it all, and I don't think you can be all things to all people. It's a myth. You can't. You have to pick and choose, and your life is a book, and there are chapters in the book that you go through. I had a very long set of chapters that were all about my dream of creating, you know, a hit television show, and then there was a point in time where I stepped back from that. I went, you know, I'm tired, you know, and I think I deserve a break. And my break went on for quite some time. I had to recharge myself. I wanted to reconnect with my friends. I wanted to reconnect with my family, and now I feel like I'm reopening yet another chapter, Act 3, you know, where I'm going to do some more work. And you know, I've not been good at trying to make all those things happen at one time. I don't think anybody's good at it.
How do you think things have changed in the business from the time that you started till now?
Well, you know, I didn't look around and see a lot of women in the business in power positions when I first started. And now I do see a lot of them, you know. I think it's fantastic, you know. We're at the Emmys this year, I think 4 of the 5 directing nominees for comedies were women. Wow, that's unusual, you know, but it's good, little by little, one step at a time, you know. It's becoming commonplace.
Why do you think that is? Do you think that women shied away from leadership positions, or that the opportunities weren't available to them?
That's a complicated question. You know, I think there's a combination of both those things. I think that the opportunities really weren't there for women. It wasn't normal to see a woman behind the camera, commanding a stage. At the same time, women were used to playing a certain role and trying to balance motherhood and household chores and holding a job, and it just sometimes proves to be too much, you know. So the women coming up the ranks with me, we all struggled with this whole issue of balance. You know, the women still had the primary child rearing duties, did most of the housekeeping and meal planning, and then had to go and work on a show with such demanding hours. Really hard to do. We all needed wives, you know, and I think some women just opted out of that, you know, just like that's a little too much. But clearly the support systems now are changing, and it's more common to see women. And so when I was at Warner Brothers, they began a daycare facility for women working on the lot. They were the first ones to do it, and that was the beginning of seeing more people like me walking around the lot, you know, with the director's hat on, or, you know, running a show. It's fun now to go and see how many of us there are.